There's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Sery Kim is a Republican strategist and former senior advisor in the Trump administration. She joins us from Dallas. Professor David Schultz teaches political science and election law at Hamline University and the University of Minnesota. Hilary Shelton is the director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau and senior vice president for advocacy and policy. And with us from New York is Aaron Maté. He's a contributing writer for The Nation magazine and host of Pushback with Aaron Maté. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Aaron, let me start with you. We have partial results right now, 62% to be exact. Pete Buttigieg leads in the delegate count, while Bernie Sanders leads in the popular vote. Explaining that's going to take a whole show, so let's just go to the chaos and confusion last night. What did you make of it?
I think it was really unfortunate, and it speaks to the importance of not drawing any conclusions now, because as you say, there are only 62% of the votes counted. But yeah, for everybody involved, it was unfortunate. Bernie Sanders' campaign says, according to its own numbers, that Bernie came out in the lead. So we will see, but no matter who the victor is, they were denied, the momentum that comes from being the winner in Iowa. And we should stress that no matter what happens, it's only one state, and there's still a very long contest to go.
Hilary, perhaps one of the big surprises of the night was, as our reporter pointed out, was Joe Biden's performance. I mean, here we have a former vice president to Barack Obama, a longtime United States senator, fourth place.
It's amazing to see it play out this way, but in some ways not surprising as you look throughout history. One of the things that came to mind to me immediately, of course, was the 2008 election, in which, as Barack Obama, running for the first time, won Iowa. But looking for that balance that usually comes along, even without the technical difficulties that we experienced this time, even without all that set aside, Obama lost New Hampshire, and Hillary Clinton was able to win, Hillary Clinton being the more established candidate at the time.
Right.
So just to say that these worlds can move in a lot of different ways as we're moving throughout this whole primary process and whatnot. It's sad, and I agree with the previous speaker, that it's really challenging when you don't have a clear and concise understanding of exactly who won because of those technical difficulties. So we'll see how that moves. But we've also seen, even when we do, sometimes the person bouncing out of first place coming out of Iowa does not necessarily win New Hampshire.
But these early contests are very important, aren't
they? Oh, they are. They're very important. They're very important because people are looking at indications all along the way. We're trying to decide who's going to be the candidate that actually represents the Democratic Party. And as we're moving through that process, people are actually looking at the candidates, and quite frankly, one of the great things about Iowa, even with some of the issues raised about whether or not it should be the place, when you sit down with candidates along the same lines as they do in the Iowa primary format, it's quite different. It's a one-on-one conversation that happens, and clearly Pete Buttigieg has demonstrated that he's someone that functions very well under those circumstances. In my experience, having met him, I see why they were so receptive to him. That good Midwestern sensibility actually being presented in those meetings in people's homes and diners and other things that are very much part of what a primary looks like in Iowa. I think is extraordinary. So it's good to see.
All right, let's go to Dallas, to Sery Kim. Sery, I imagine that the Republicans must be loving this. President Trump actually responded to the chaos of last night. He said the Democratic caucuses were an unmitigated disaster. What did you make of the events of last night? And in a sense, does President Trump actually emerge a winner in this?
I think that's a great point that you make, because the Democratic Party does seem to have a bifurcated problem. First and foremost, President Trump is the winner, because the point of Iowa, specifically on the Democratic side, is for them to pick a candidate that they can then push forward to go against President Trump. And if they can't even tally the votes in their own primary, how can they actually manage the forces that they need to beat an incumbent president? And the second problem that the Democratic Party seems to have is that, as the news reports have shown in the last 24 hours, the party apparatus themselves are blaming Iowans. They are blaming the very voters that they need in a critical state to propel their nominee to beat President Trump, because President Trump beat Hillary Clinton by 9 points in 2016.
David Schultz, are the Democrats going to have more problems ahead beyond the confusion of last night? As Sery just pointed out, President Trump is going to make hay of this. He's going to say, look, the Democrats can't run a caucus. How can they run the country?
No, I think they had several problems already going into this election, of which the Iowa caucuses contribute to. And I think sort of there's two issues that I think the Democrats faced, or actually three issues. One, a divided party in sense of ideology. Are they a more moderate party, or are they of the Bidens and the Buttigiegs, or of the Warren and Sanders? Second, it's what I call the narrative, that yes, I think the Democrats are united against Donald Trump, but to win, you have to be more than just against something. You have to have a narrative, a story, some message, and the Democrats are still looking for it. But more importantly, I think the most important issue is that the Democrats need what I call the electoral college strategy. We know they won the popular vote 4 years ago. They lost it in the electoral college. If you start to look at the alignment in terms of how the votes are playing out again, I think the Democrats have a pretty good chance of winning the popular vote again, but they need to have a strategy that's going to help them win in critical swing states such as Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, perhaps Iowa. So it's developing that strategy that, again, I'm going to call it the race for 270 electoral votes, which I think is very imperative, and I haven't seen that emerge yet in terms of a candidate or a narrative or strategy that helps them get there.
Aaron Mate, as David points out, the Democrats are united in their desire to unseat Donald Trump, but I'm wondering how much of a problem do they have within the party? There seems to be an internal revolt in the party. It pits the more progressive wing of the party against the moderate or centrist wing of the party, and will that hurt them in this election?
It is a major issue, and I should say I'm among those who supports the progressive side and very much hopes that Bernie Sanders will have the nomination, because for the reasons that the previous speaker laid out, I think that Bernie Sanders answers the quandary the Democrats face. Democrats have had a series of failures going back many years now. Barack Obama was one exception, but aside from that, you had John Kerry and Hillary Clinton losing races that I think that they should have won. Bernie Sanders solves the problem because he is speaking to the issues that Donald Trump exploited in 2016. Donald Trump portrayed himself, I think falsely, as an anti-establishment candidate. He promised to scale back foreign wars and drain the swamp. He's done the exact opposite. Bernie Sanders is someone who, with his record, has been taking on Wall Street and fighting militarism his entire political career. And we saw with his primary success in states like Michigan in 2016 that he appeals to working class voters. So that is why I see him as the best chance to win back the voters that Trump won over in 2016.
Aaron, do you think he has national appeal? I mean, I can imagine him having appeal in large urban areas on the coastlines, but what about across the country? Some would say that his views or his policies are a bit too extreme.
Well, first of all, we often forget that a lot of the country doesn't vote. So even back in 2016, when you had this pivotal existential vote between Clinton and Trump, the turnout was something like 55%. So Bernie Sanders, I think, has shown the ability to win over voters who feel as if no candidates have ever represented their interests. Because looking back over, decades of neoliberal policies, there has been broad consensus inside the establishment on critical issues. That's why you had so many Democrats like John Kerry, like Joe Biden, like Hillary Clinton. All of them supported the Iraq War. Bernie Sanders bucks that trend, and so I think he can win over those voters who've been left on the sidelines.
Hillary, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's sort of two rival strategies here, and it's not clear which is accurate. Strategy one, I think as the previous commentator was making here, is to say the goal is to bring into the electorate voters who've traditionally felt marginalized, bring them in. The other strategy is the one of saying that there is a number of swing voters in play that the Democrats can bring over. The reality is that the percentage of swing voters out there is incredibly small at this point, and so it's debatable. Can you move them? But maybe in a election where you're only looking at a half a dozen states that really matter right now, maybe moving small numbers. For example, we know 4 years ago, shift 80,000 voters in 3 states. Clinton's president of the United States. So one, it may be only at the end of the day moving a small number of voters, or it's possible that trying to bring new voters in, bringing that other 45% in or part of it, becomes a strategy. And both of them are I speak as a political scientist here, both of them are kind of empirically interesting questions that require different tactics in terms of being able to mobilize those voters.
Hilary, how important is it for Democrats to bring out new voters? Not just that, but to generate the kind of excitement that Barack Obama did in 2008, where he pulled together this coalition of people, many of whom had not voted before.
It's crucial. It's absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that fell a little short as Hillary Clinton was running for election, even though it's still important to recognize that she got more votes than Trump did. Yeah. But nonetheless, as we think about how our process works, she didn't have the delegates she needed to get it through. So it's crucial. So what we saw beginning in this process is so many different candidates running under the Democratic umbrella that were bringing their constituents with them. The challenge right now, of course, is as we're moving through this process, can they hang on to them? And more importantly, as we move to who is the nominee, can we transfer our delegates, if we're not the nominee, over to whoever the nominee is? That is going to be crucial going through this process. What this demonstrates, I would argue, is how diverse the Democratic Party umbrella is. And the question still is, how do we hold on to everyone from each of the candidates that are running as we move through that one candidate that would carry the standard bearer?
Do you have any view on who that one candidate would be?
You know, I have no idea. Let me just say, I know so many of them,
right.
have worked with them in their roles on Capitol Hill. They're all so extraordinary in so many ways. Right. It's the agenda and the emphasis that's going to make a difference, and in many ways, how people interpret the failings of the Trump administration as we think about in places like Iowa, even farmers getting hit by the embargo and other issues along those lines.
Sery Kim, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could throw one more thing in, I know we're putting our big emphasis upon the difficulties that the Democrats face, but one shouldn't underscore some of the challenges that Donald Trump and the Republican Party faces also. For example, we know that the president has a huge disapproval, and so he's got to address that. But the other thing is that his core base is white working class America, especially white, say, working class evangelical America, and as a percentage of the population, it continues to go down, and it's a smaller percentage of the electorate this year than it was 4 years ago. So he has to figure out how to do what? How to generate a higher percentage turnout of his base, even though that base is smaller than it was 4 years ago, compared to what? The Democrats need to get the turnout that they saw in 2018. So both parties, I think, are facing a short-term problem in terms of who their bases are and mobilizing them. Clearly, longer term, both parties also face an existential problem in terms of their current bases are literally exiting out.
Sery Kim, what's your view on that? How do the Republicans overcome that challenge that President Trump will face in November, and that is pushing up that percentage beyond the base whose support he enjoys right now?
Well, so this is where all three panelists seem to have three major problems. First and foremost, just look at me. I'm not white, I'm not working class, and I'm clearly a supporter of President Trump. I think the Democratic Party is running on false assumptions, and as long as they continue to run on those false assumptions, they will turn away the heartland of America who don't want to be stigmatized for whatever they look like. Second, as it comes to President Trump and the Democratic field, whoever they are, the reason why voters come to Trump, despite his disapproval ratings, is because of the issues. And very clearly, they did an analysis, and this is from the New York Times, this is not from the Trump campaign, that the #1 issues between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton when they had to choose in 2016 were judges. And Donald Trump has confirmed 191. And third, as it relates to the panelists and what they particularly feel as to what is wrong with President Trump, at the end of the day, when you look at wars, when you look at spending, when you look at Obamacare, when you look at the various issues that President Obama put forward in both terms that he was in office, Trump won. The president won because he ran against them, and he's running against those same forces. So as long as these three issues are not being addressed by the Democratic Party, they're going to lose again in 2020, and they're going to lose big.
Hilary?
Well, if you think about the issues like judges, I don't think judges were a consideration at the time the decision was being made, even though there are clear differences.
That was according to the New York Times.
Well, the New York Times got it wrong, I believe, on a number of pieces. This is, I think, about the fight that's been happening here on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. So moving along these lines, I think it's right, and I agree with her, and that Trump is going to have to hold on to those who he's won already, including those that are quite disappointed with some of the changes that have happened. I mentioned farmers as one of the examples. Some of those that work for various corporations that are now not here are saying that Trump is not going to be helpful to them. Yeah. He's going to have to hold on, and at the same time, he's going to have to be able to bring new people into the fold. This was laid out. Those who are supporting him are less now than they were as we looked at the election almost 4 years ago. As we're thinking about what's going to happen here, what is he going to do to fill those crosses as he moves forward? And number two, we still don't know who the Democratic candidate is going to be yet. That's going to make a huge difference as we move to the polls in November this year.
Aaron Mehta, it seems, right on cue, after this night of chaos and confusion, Gallup releases a poll which shows that President Trump's approval rating has increased. It's up to 49% now. It's the best it's ever been. In fact, it's better than President Obama's approval rating at the same time in his presidency. So we had 2 years of Russiagate and the Mueller investigation. Then we had months of impeachment. But this guy seems like the Teflon Don. Nothing seems to stick.
Well, that's because, as I've argued from the beginning, that both Russiagate and its sequel, Ukrainegate, were, in fact, huge mistakes for Democrats to follow. The evidence for them just wasn't there, and I don't think voters care about whether or not we're arming Ukraine sufficiently. They care about health care and jobs and not sending their kids off to die in wars. And Trump did a good job in 2016, I'll give him that, of making people think that he was going to improve their lives. He was going to drain the swamp. He didn't do that. He's done the exact opposite. Bernie Sanders is someone with a record of standing up to foreign wars, of standing up to Wall Street. And look, I'll cite a pretty informed source here. Donald Trump himself, on a recent recording that came out from Lev Parnas, this associate who's been caught up in Ukrainegate, Donald Trump was recorded saying that he feared in 2016 Hilary Clinton picking Bernie Sanders as her vice presidential running mate because Bernie Sanders was strong on trade. And Trump said that Bernie was the only VP pick who he actually feared because Bernie has the credentials to actually call Trump out on the key issues on the economy, whereas people like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and the faction of the Democratic elite that they represent, they have a history of catering to Wall Street and catering to foreign wars. So that's where Bernie Sanders poses a challenge to Trump that others don't.
David Schultz, here's something that might need a bit of explaining. I mean, I cited that poll, that Gallup poll, that says that President Trump enjoys an approval rating of 49%. But if you look at other polls, if you look at a matchup between almost all the Democrat candidates against President Trump, the Democrat candidates are winning. There is a discrepancy there.
Okay, first off, there's two different points here. One of them is that we always seem to cite sort of a national aggregate poll, and again, forget the fact that what? It's really about the presidential race, the Electoral College. It's 50 states plus the District of Columbia. We know twice in the last 16 or actually 20 years, Democrats have received more of the popular vote than Republicans. So at the end of the day, I always like to tell people, forget about the popular vote, forget about how the candidates match up in national public opinion polls. Think more in terms of how it's going to play out, again, as I said before, in critical states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, Iowa, for example. And so we need to be factoring on that and thinking about, is there a particular candidate that speaks better to the concerns and issues of those voters, and again, those critical number of states. And so in many ways, using the national polls and his approval ratings nationally is almost besides the point regarding what really happens in a presidential election, which is what? Again, the race for 270.
Hillary, the Democrats have built this narrative about President Trump that he's corrupt, he's even criminal, sleazy, shallow, prone to tantrums, immature, etc. But we look at this poll number, this Gallup poll number, that's evidence that it's the economy that counts, isn't it?
Well, the economy is going to be most stabilizing in any conversation along these lines. But as we're thinking about Trump and those and how they're supporting or not, one of the most important issues is where his disapproval rating is right now, and we're seeing that hardening and growing as we've moved through this process. So both issues are very, very important. Again, when polling is a very good indicator of where things are going, but it's not the end-all, do-all. I still remember so well what happened to even Barack Obama, again, coming out of the first primary in Iowa in 2008. He came out, the assumption was he was going to bounce up and win New Hampshire as well, and he didn't. When great pollsters like John Zogby were asked what happened, all he did was smile at Jon Stewart and said, "We have no idea." In other words, it's a prediction. It's a very educated prediction, not always accurate.
Okay, Sery Kim.
Polls are, remember, polls are snapshots in time.
Exactly.
And remember, take us back to 2015. Actually, if we do 2007, Clinton had 40-point lead over Obama. 4 years ago, 40-point lead over Sanders, and it was razor-thin campaigns at the end. At the end of the day, remember, it's campaigns matter. Candidates matter, messages matter, strategy matters, and that's going to be critical going into the 2020 election. What are the relative strategies, messages, and candidates that we're going to see going into November?
Okay, Sery Kim, I'm sure President Trump has a preferred candidate that he'd like to go up against in November. Who's that candidate?
I honestly think the president would be happy to go up against any of them, because at the end of the day, as the panelists are espousing, what America is seeing is the world's strongest economy. What America is seeing is unemployment is at the lowest it's been since the creation of unemployment numbers in 1969. What we are seeing is the stock market is going to hit 30,000 for the first time ever. What they are seeing are these trade deals being signed between Mexico and Canada, the revised NAFTA called USMCA, as well as negotiations with China. So when we put the issues on the table, that's what he has. And as it relates to candidates and personalities, this is why the Democratic Party seems to be so frustrated, and you see this bifurcated analysis about who can win in 2020, because Trump is a fighter. Which one of these candidates coming out of Iowa can you see match up with him for 6 months? We don't, and that's why he's happy with any of them.
All right, Aaron,
what we're also seeing, though, are tens of millions of people who don't have health insurance, millions more who have health insurance. It doesn't cover their needs. We're seeing wages that have been stagnant for decades, an economy that works best for the top, and Bernie Sanders is the only candidate on the Democratic side, and in the entire field, really, who is willing to actually take this on and actually has bold policies to fix these issues, and who is willing to fight the forces who are responsible for them. Donald Trump blames immigrants for U.S. problems, and Democrats try to avoid taking on the 1% with vague language about bringing everyone together and focusing on sort of side issues. Bernie Sanders is willing to call out the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, the prison-industrial complex. He names the bad guys by name, and he's willing, with the movement that he has built and those he will attract, to take them on.
Okay, Aaron, I just want to get to one.
Excuse me, sir, but you can't put out talking points without facts. You can't put out saying that insurance is at the highest it's ever been when President Obama passed Obamacare and that law is still in the land. You can't
I didn't say it's the highest it's ever been. I didn't say that. I said millions of people are without health insurance. That's what I said.
Well, that is a number that is still into effect, despite the fact that President Obama passed a law saying that there wouldn't be there. So what I'm saying is that it's really easy to put out talking points, but when you match up numbers, the numbers exist. Stagnant wages have been in place since before President Obama.
Okay.
They've been there since President Clinton. And what have they done?
That's
Nothing.
True. That's
the
true.
economy
You're right.
is strong.
Okay.
That's right. And that's why Bernie Sanders is willing to break with the policies of both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, which have favored Wall Street.
We are going to have to go right here. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.